Welcome back to HTP Storytime. Tonight we'll be playing babysitters as we read Damon Runyon's classic, Butch Minds the Baby. Babysitting in and of itself is by far not the most exciting way to spend an evening, but what if, in minding said infant, we will be sitting in on a master criminal at work, aiming to make one last huge score before he walks off into the sunset. The setting for tonight's tale is New York City during the Prohibition era, somewhere between 1920 and 1933. The Butch we meet in our story tonight is making ends meet with some beer and whiskey smuggling, but he's presented with an opportunity to return to his former profession for one last big score. Join me in finding out if crime will pay off tonight when Butch minds the baby. Let's go. One evening along about 7 o'clock, I'm sitting in Mindy's restaurant putting on the gefilte fish, which is a dish I'm very fond of, when in comes 3 parties from Brooklyn wearing caps as follows: Harry the Horse, Little Isidore, and Spanish John. Now these parties are not such parties as I will care to have much truck with, because I often hear rumors about them that are very discreditable, even if the rumors are not true. In fact, I hear many citizens of Brooklyn will be very glad indeed to see Harry the Horse, Little Isidore, and Spanish John move away from there, as they are always doing something that is considered a knock to the community, such as robbing people or maybe shooting or stabbing them. I'm really much surprised to see these parties on Broadway, as it is well known that the Broadway coppers just naturally love to shove such parties around. But here they are in Mindy's, and there I am. So of course I give them a large hello, as I never wish to seem inhospitable, even to Brooklyn parties. Right away they come over to my table and sit down, and little Isidore reaches out and spears himself a big hunk of my gefilte fish with his fingers, but I overlook this, as I'm using the only knife on the table. Then they all sit there looking at me without saying anything, and the way they look at me makes me very nervous indeed. Finally, I figure that maybe they are a little embarrassed being in a high-class spot such as Mindy's, with legitimate people around. So I say to them very polite, "It's a nice night." "What is nice about it?" asks Harry the Horse, who is a thin man with a sharp face and sharp eyes. Well, now that it is put to me in this way, I can see there's nothing so nice about the night at that. So I try to think of something else jolly to say, while little Isidore keeps spearing at my gefilte fish with his fingers, and Spanish John nabs one of my potatoes. "Where does Big Butch live?" Harry the Horse asks. "Big Butch?" I say, as if I had never heard the name before in my life, because in this man's town it is never a good idea to answer any question without thinking it over, as sometimes you may give the right answer to the wrong guy, or the wrong answer to the right guy. "Where does Big Butch live?" I ask them again. "Yes, where does he live?" Harry the Horse says, very impatient. "We wish you to take us to him." "Now wait a minute, Harry," I say, and I'm now more nervous than somewhat. I'm not sure I remember the exact house Big Butch lives in, and furthermore, I'm not sure Big Butch would care to have me bringing people to see him, especially 3 at a time, and especially from Brooklyn. You know, Big Butch has a very bad disposition, and there is no telling what he may say to me if he does not like the idea of me taking you to him. "Everything is kosher," Harry the Horse says. "You need not be afraid of anything whatever. We have a business proposition for Big Butch, so you take us to him at once, or the chances are I will have to put the arm on somebody around here." Well, as the only one around there for him to put the arm on at this time seems to be me, I can see where it will be a good policy for me to take these parties to Big Butch, especially as the last of my gefilte fish is just going down little Isidore's gullet, and Spanish John is finishing up my potatoes, and is dunking a piece of rye bread in my coffee, so there's nothing left for me to eat. So I lead them over into West 49th Street near 10th Avenue, where Big Butch lives on the ground floor of an old brown stone front house. And who is sitting out on the stoop but Big Butch himself? In fact, everybody in the neighborhood is sitting out on the front stoops over there, including women and children, because sitting out on the front steps is quite a custom in this section. Big Butch is peeled down to his undershirt and pants, and he has no shoes on his feet, as Big Butch is a guy who likes his comfort. Furthermore, he is smoking a cigar, and laid out on the stoop beside him on a blanket is a little baby with not much clothes on. This baby seems to be asleep, and every now and then Big Butch fans it with a folded newspaper to shoo away the mosquitoes that wish to nibble on the baby. These mosquitoes come across the river from the Jersey side on hot nights, and they seem to be very fond of babies. "Hello, Butch," I say, as we stop in front of the stoop. "Shh," Butch says, pointing at the baby and making more noises with his shush than an engine blowing off steam. Then he gets up and tiptoes down to the sidewalk where we are standing, and I am hoping that Butch feels all right, because when Butch does not feel so good, he's apt to be very short with one and all. He's a guy of maybe 6'2" and a couple of feet wide, and he has big hairy hands and a mean look. In fact, Big Butch is known all over this man's town as a guy you must not monkey with in any respect, so it takes plenty of weight off of me when I see that he seems to know the parties from Brooklyn and nods at them very friendly, especially at Harry the horse. And right away Harry states a most surprising proposition to Big Butch. It seems that there is a big coal company which has an office in an old building down in West 18th Street, and in this office is a safe. And in this safe is the company payroll of $20,000 cash money. Harry the horse knows the money is there because a personal friend of his, who is the paymaster for the company, puts it there late this very afternoon. It seems that the paymaster enters into a dicker with Harry the horse and little Isidore and Spanish John for them to slug him while he is carrying the payroll from the bank to the office in the afternoon. But something happens that they miss connections on the exact spot, so the paymaster has to carry the sugar onto the office without being slugged, and there it is now in 2 fat bundles. Personally, it seems to me as I listen to Harry's story that the paymaster must be a very dishonest character to be making deals to hold still while he's being slugged and the company's sugar taken away from him. But of course it is none of my business, so I take no part in this conversation. Well, it seems that Harry the horse and little Isidore and Spanish John wish to get the money out of the safe, but none of them knows anything about opening safes. And while they are standing around over in Brooklyn talking over what is to be done in this emergency, Harry suddenly remembers that Big Butch is once in the business of opening safes for a living. In fact, I hear afterwards that Big Butch is considered the best safe opener east of the Mississippi in his day. But the law finally takes to sending him to Sing Sing for opening these safes. And after he's in and out of Sing Sing 3 different times for opening safes, Butch gets sick and tired of the place, especially as they pass what is called the Boehm's Law in New York, which is a law that says if a guy is sent to Sing Sing 4 times hand running, he must stay there for the rest of his life without any argument about it. So Big Butch gives up opening safes for a living and goes into business in a small way, such as running beer and handling a little scotch now and then, and becomes an honest citizen. Furthermore, he marries one of the neighborhood's children over on the west side by the name of Mary Murphy. And I judge the baby on this stoop comes of this marriage between Big Butch and Mary, because I can see that it is a very homely baby indeed. Still, I never see many babies that I consider rose geraniums for looks anyway. Well, it finally comes out that the idea of Harry the horse and little Isidore and Spanish John is to get Big Butch to open the coal company's safe and take the payroll money out. And they are willing to give him 50% of the money for his bother, taking 50% for themselves for finding the plant and paying all the overheads, such as the paymaster, out of their bit, which strikes me as a pretty fair sort of deal for Big Butch. But Butch only shakes his head. It is old-fashioned stuff, Butch says. Nobody opens peat boxes for a living anymore. They make the boxes too good, and they are all wired up with alarms and are a lot of trouble generally. I'm in a legitimate business now and going along. You boys know I cannot stand another fall, what with being away 3 times already, and in addition to this, I must mind the baby. My old lady goes to Mrs. Clancy's wake tonight up in the Bronx, and the chances are she will be there all night, as she is very fond of wakes. So I must mind little John Ignatius Jr. Listen, Butch, Harry the horse says. This is a very soft peat. It is old-fashioned. You can open it with a toothpick. There are no wires on it because they never put more than a dime in it before in years. It just happens they have to put the 20 G's in it tonight because my pal the paymaster makes it a point not to get back from the jug with a scratch in time to pay off today, especially after he sees we miss out on him. It is the softest touch you will ever know, and where can a guy pick up 10 G's like this? I can see that Big Butch is thinking the 10 G's over very seriously at that. Because in these times nobody can afford to pass up 10 G's, especially a guy in the beer business, which is very, very tough just now. But finally he shakes his head again and says like this, "No," he says, "I must let it go, because I must mind the baby. My old lady is very, very particular about this, and I darest not leave little John Ignatius Jr. for a minute. If Mary comes home and finds I'm not minding the baby, she will put the blast on me plenty. I like to turn a few honest bobs now and then as well as anybody, but," Butch says, "John Ignatius Jr. comes first with me." Then he turns away and goes back to the stoop as much as to say he is through arguing, and sits down beside John Ignatius Jr. Again, just in time to keep a mosquito from carrying off one of John's legs. Anybody can see that Big Butch is very fond of this baby, though personally, I will not give you a dime a dozen for babies, male and female. Well, Harry the horse and little Isidore and Spanish John are very much disappointed and stand around talking among themselves, and paying no attention to me, when all of a sudden Spanish John, who never has much to say up to this time, seems to have a bright idea. He talks to Harry and Isidore, and they get all pleasured up over what he has to say, and finally Harry goes to Big Butch. "Shh," Big Butch says, pointing to the baby as Harry opens his mouth. "Listen, Butch," Harry says in a whisper, "we can take the baby with us, and you can mind it and work too." "Why," Big Butch whispers back, "this is quite an idea indeed. Let us go into the house and talk things over." So he picks up the baby and leads us into his joint and gets out some pretty fair beer, though it is needled a little at that, and we sit around the kitchen chewing the fat in whispers. There's a crib in the kitchen, and Butch puts the baby in his crib, and it keeps on snoozing away first rate while we are talking. In fact, it is sleeping so sound that I'm commencing to figure that Butch must give it some of the needled beer he is feeding us, because I'm feeling a little dopey myself. Finally, Butch says that as long as he can take John Ignatius Jr. with us, he sees no reason why he shall not go, and open the safe for them. Only, he says, he must have 5% more to put in the baby's bank when he gets back, so as to round himself up with his ever-loving wife in case of a beef from her over keeping the baby out in the night air. Harry the horse says he considers this extra 5% a little strong, but Spanish John, who seems to be a very square guy, says that after all, it is only fair to cut the baby in if it is to be with them when they are making the score. And little Isidore seems to think this is all right too. So Harry the horse gives in and says 5% it is. Well, as they do not wish to start out until after midnight, and as there is plenty of time, Big Butch gets out some more needled beer, and then he goes looking for the tools with which he opens safes, and which, he says, he does not see since the day John Ignatius Jr. is born, and he gets them out to build the crib. Now this is a good time for me to bid one and all farewell, and what keeps me there is something I cannot tell you to this day, because personally I never before have any idea of taking part in safe opening, especially with a baby, as I consider such actions very dishonorable. When I come to think things over afterwards, the only thing I can figure is the needled beer, But I wish to say I'm really very much surprised at myself when I find myself in a taxi cab along about 1 o'clock in the morning with these Brooklyn parties and Big Butch and the Baby.